In America, Part 7. 26th. It rained. I implored Mother Schuyler to select a book from her library. All the literature was packed in there, beginning with Socrates, sane as a silver dollar. Every book was without finger marks. Book without finger mark is like bread without brown crust. Dear finger mark. The fashion is to buy books and to glance at their covers, I suppose, but not to read them. Modern publications aren't meant to be read, are they? The authors have degenerated to the place of upholsterers. Isn't it a shame? Mrs. Schuyler picked out for me Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. My uncle said, "American woman can't keep away from Omar and chicken salad." I began to peruse it. The raindrops by my window tuned tap, tap, tip, tap, tap. I thumped the book on the floor and exclaimed, "Mr. Khayyam, Rubaiyat is a menace against civilization. Americanism is nothing but the delight in life and the world. I wonder why the wise government of Washington does not oppose its pagan circulation. It is leprosy." But I thought how truly true was his "I came like water, and like wind I go." I took up the book and opened it again. Then I shut it. I listened to the tap, tap, tip. Doesn't it sound like a wan voice of Omar? Yes. 27th. A lady whom I met at Mrs. Schuyler's reception sent me a mass of distinguished roses. Loving American. I said I would arrange them in Japanese cult. My style is the Enshin. America is destitute of flowers. Nippon is known as a paradise of botanists. The scientists of flower decoration, if I may call them so, are given a great advantage in their craft of delineating beauty. The rose is not much of a flower to the Jap mind. They never employ it in their work. It has no grace of line. Its perfume cannot indemnify for its being thorny. Things not qualified to convey charm are declined from the tokonoma. I love roses awfully well myself. I will make the best of them in my art. Is there any proper vase in Schuyler's house? Mother Schuyler fetched me 2 pieces. One was a silver vase and the other a china one. I couldn't use them, I was sorry. Silver was commercial looking. The painting on the china a hodgepodge of a joss house. Then I was seized with a thought. I ran down to the kitchen. I borrowed an old scrubbing bucket. "Such a soft antique hue!" I exclaimed with delight. I elected 1 imperial rose and 1 little one for a retainer. I fixed them in the bucket. I thought it was verily the simplicity of the illustrious Mr. Rikyou. I presented the rest of the roses to Mrs. Schuyler Jr. She stared at the bucket without a word. I knew that her silence was the most forcible irony. She didn't approve of setting such a bucket on the table. "'Merican gins don't know any art," I said when she left. My uncle begged me not to act so fantastically. 28th. "Here's a shamisen, Morning Glory," Mother Schuyler cried from the hall. I darted out of my room. "Well!" I exclaimed. Shamisen? It is a 3-stringed guitar of Japan. Mr. Schuyler Jr. had sent it from Yokohama, as she explained. She wished me to tinkle a little gambling music in the parlor before dinner. It is a hard implement to handle. It has no notation. Attainment is through unending blind practice. I was compelled to learn by Mother many a year ago, but I soon gave it up for an English spelling book. But I dare say I can play. I regulated the key to begin with. Ting, ting, chang, chang, ting. "Want to hum, Uncle?" I asked, facing aside. "Love ditty is desirable," Oji-san considered. "Don't fancy me a geisha," I said in defending laughter. Then I murmured an old hauta, Haori kakushite, which was Englished by someone. She hid his coat, She plucked his sleeve. "Today you cannot go. Today at least you will not leave the heart that loves you so." The mado she undid, and back of the shoji slid, and clinging cried, "Dear Lord, perceive the whole world is snow." 29th. We went to a theatre last evening. Dear classical Flower Path! How I missed it in the American stage. Flower Path? It is a projection into the auditorium used to represent when one starts out of the house or returns. So the American stage has no front gate scene. Everyone enters very likely from the kitchen door. The stage never turns round like the Japanese stage. Oh dear, iyadawa. American play has too much kissing. Each time I was electrified. The pit was filled with a well-behaved throng. All the ladies took off their hats. Do they pay more respect than in church? The gentlemen never whiffed smoke. Japan theatre is a hurly-burly. The boys roar up, "Honorable tea! Okawa yoroshi! Honorable cake!" The attendants of tea-houses bow around to the beneficent habitués like inclining puppets. Women sob. They laugh, stuffing their sleeves into their mouths. They are ready to put themselves in the play. They are sentimental. American women place themselves above the play. I doubted whether they were criticizing or enjoying. Some lady even used a spyglass to examine the face of a player. I thought it decidedly an impertinence. What a pry! I will not act to such an assembly if I ever happen to be an actress. What was the title of the play? I could hardly understand half of it. I tried hard to swallow my gape. 30th. Mr. Oscar Ellis came to put the finishing touch to my picture. The execution was subtle sureness. He said that he would offer it to his beloved auntie, Mother Schuyler, of course, begging to let it ornament the wall of my room. My room? It is my room for a few days yet. I thought it exceedingly sweet. The wall is duskily red. The effect would be superb. When I announced to him that our leave would take place on the approaching 4th, he started as if he had received a stroke. "So soon?" he said. "Yes," I said, turning my uneasy face. "We are only beginning to understand each other." "I am a bird of passage, as you know. I have to fly on my road." The air grew tragic. Then Oscar said, "What will you do when you tire of flying?" "Saw." "Well?" "I'll return to Los Angeles and induce you to marry me with my honorable Oriental oratory. Will that do?" We interchanged our nimble look. We laughed afterward. After he left Schuyler's, I said to myself that I would not mind positively if he would kiss me. The kiss must be on my brow, however. Lips are too personal. I wrote a note beseeching him not to forget to kiss me at my farewell. Then I chewed the note. I reviled my folly. 31st. Street walking is a delight. I'll mirror my face in the glass of the shop windows ambling by. I dropped a handkerchief today. A gentle gentleman, man behind me should be young and good-looking always, picked it up. His respectful "pardon me" made me feel as if I were living in the silver-armored age of chivalry. Shall I drop something again? I observed a variety of form in raising the skirt. One lifted a bit of the left by her fingertips. Another pulled up the right edge of her front. Another clinched out the center of her back, showing a significant fist. A corpulent one stepped, holding up both sides of her front. The miserable underskirt revealed itself in red. Which mode is becoming to me? January 1st, 1900. Is today the opening of another century? Happy New Year! I will send a lot of shinen omideto to Tokyo. Isn't this a queer New Year? No shimenawa along the facades with flitting gohei. no gate pine tree, no sambo for an oblation unto the gods in any room, no rice bread, no golden toso for the cup. I mingled with the neighbors' girls for a rope jumping. We played hide and seek. I offered 10 cents reward to the one who detected me. I abandoned the unprofitable job after emptying out all my change. Miss Olive called on a bicycle. I persuaded her to let me try on her bloomers. She exchanged them for my walking skirt, which was 4 inches shorter. We hurried to the garden. She helped me on the wheel. Such a bad American girl! She slipped her hand from it. I fell on a bush. The touchy rose thorned in my hand. Second, I made a discovery. Mother Schuyler's teeth are all false. I have no chance to explore whether her hair is a wig. She chains a big bunch of keys to her waist. Its rattle sounds housewifely. She forgot it, laying it on the sitting-room table. I knotted it to my waist strap. I jiggled it. Jarring, 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 jarring. Third, the sayonara dinner was given. Mrs. Ellis's folks joined us. Mother Schuyler repeated every 10 minutes her query, when would I visit them again? Mr. Oscar set his depressive look on me. I wasn't brave enough to encounter it. I slid away from confronting him. I found an elegant young man. He impressed me as an image of Apollo. Only God knows when I will reprint my footsteps on the soil of Los Angeles. I felt awfully sorry in leaving such an agreeable company. Fold your tent like the Arabs and silently steal away. How sad. Fourth, goodbye, Mr. Parrot. San Francisco, 5th. I am again at Mrs. Willis's. San Francisco! Such miraculous San Francisco water! I will taste bliss again in drinking the midnight water, stretching out my arm from the bed. 6th. I tied Dorothy's hair in Nippon style. She pleased me much by remembering the Japanese words I taught her. She is a cute dear. The mode had been the otabaka bon. I straightened her hair with my wet hand. I added a tiny bit of crimson crepe. She looked a lovely fairy. 7th. Rainy day. The heavily reserved weather confines me in the pose of genius. My hair lounged down my shoulders. Disorder is the first step in being a genius, I fancy. My eyes should be rolled up to the sky in divine tragicalness. I have had a greediness for the name of novelist. Today I found myself in the crisis where I must scribble or die. I regret to say that mine is a love story also, as every beginner's book has been. I hope everybody will be contented with The Destiny, a respectable title for my fiction. Who says it is the style of name employed 100 years ago? The book will be concluded with 300 pages. Now I wonder whether a long story is in demand. Chapter 1 is as follows. When the Moon Rose. This story begins when the moon rose. Its silvery rays, it was 6 p.m. of April, fell on the Shiba Park in laughter. My heroine jogged along into the park, singing a light song. Miss Honorable Moon, how old are you? 13 and 7, you say? You are young enough to marry. Let me explain about her a bit. Her name is Ohana-san, 13 years old. 13? It is the age when the flower of girlhood starts to bloom. Bewitching Hana. Do you remember a well by the glorious cherry tree in the park? The Rikisha men moisten their parched lips at the heaven sent. That is its name, sir. Miss Hana looked down into the well. She began to adjust her hair. The first worry of a girl after 13 would naturally be about her hair. She gazed up to the cherry blossoms and exclaimed, "Utsukushi na! Lovely!" Then she found her face again in the well mirror, thinking what a charming Ohana-san it would make with the flowers on her hair. My worthy readers, I suppose it is time someone must enter." He came. He was a little boy. I will not mention his name just yet. He came close to her and pinched her little back. Both blushed, facing each other. They were quite strangers. The evening zephyrs stirred the cherry blossoms. They planted themselves silently among the falling petals, as ethereal as snow. "I delight to stand in the storm of petals, don't you?" Hannah inclined her head a trifle in speaking. The woman always speaks first. "Let me see your school book," again she said. "Why?" He put it in her tiny hand. "Thanks, arigato." She bowed low. When she put the book on her shoulder, she was running away, singing, "Miss Honorable Moon, how old are you?" The boy stood aghast. The author of this story found Ohana-san again by the same well on the next evening, the boy's book in her hand, of course. She paced around the well, muttering, "He must come because the moon rose," but he was not seen. My next chapter will be The Second Meeting. In America, Part 8. 8th. My precious Ada again! How could I live without her? We hastened to a circus. If I were a boy, I could earn a heap of money selling peanuts, lemonade. How those clowns did tumble! If I could share in such fun! The ringmaster was the handsomest man in the world, in shiny boots and heavenly hat. How splendidly his whip cracked! The clack dashed like a burst of bamboo. Wouldn't you be glad to be the lady on horseback? I would truly. Glance at her daring grace. I whispered to Miss Ada. Even the seal performed. We laughed till tears dropped. The circus had 20 elephants. Think, our imperial menagerie of Tokyo has only one. How poor! 9th. Last night I went over to Mrs. Console's to be given a lesson in card playing. Cribbage would be the thing. Why, because the Lambs took much pleasure in it, she said. How is poker? I suggested. Gambling game, she protested. I delight in gambling, Mrs. Console, I proclaimed. I had a wicked dream. What do you imagine? I ran away with a circus rider. 10th. I made the acquaintance of a Japanese woman. She must have been passing her 30 springs. I could be accurate in my scale, being one of her sisterhood, a cigar-stand keeper in DuPont Street. Her name is O-Fuji-san. Mrs. Wistaria brought a box of cigarettes that my uncle had ordered. The morning is unoccupied in such a retail shop. Nobody puffs much before lunch. She set herself in a tete-a-tete. The chastity of a wife may be measured by her solo on her husband. Woman's greatest joy often lies in lamenting the faults of her Teishu. Mrs. Wistaria spoke of her husband's being ill. I was to accept any chance for squandering my feelings. I sympathized, repeating, "Komaro ne? How sad!" She said that she was going to leave the city for a week for the spring of San Jose, to take care of her infirm deer. "I fear I may lose my customers," she flagged. Her husband was afflicted with rheumatism. I promised to call at her store. Japs never visit an invalid without a present. Champagne? It's too ostentatious a drink. It's like a highly rouged woman. The loving-eyed claret should be chosen. I sent a half-dozen bottles to Mrs. Wistaria's. A charity woman should be dressed in black and white. I went to DuPont Street, however, in my gray dress. Her husband struggled to entertain me. His clumsy smile appeared all the time at the wrong cue. Poor Mr. What's-his-name. Their business was an absurdly small affair. The whole stock hardly valued above $100. I thought I could conduct it rightly. I was carried away by a sudden fancy. Can't you leave your store in my hands while you are away? Say yes. No?" I pressed myself upon them eagerly. They were amazed. "High-born lady like you? Oh, no. Doshite? Doshite? Think, do you know this is the toughest part of the town?" Mrs. Wistaria tried to make me retreat. I couldn't listen to her, my whole soul being absorbed in my new caprice. I thought it remarkably romantic. I left the store to bring uncle to talk the matter over. Mrs. Wistaria's store was neighbored by every saloon. The fuddling sounds overflowed in song. "Hello, my baby, hello, my honey." 11th. Now he is my beloved uncle. He assured me of his help in carrying out my freak. "You are fitting me for a slightly better role, I fancy," he said, venturing to add even one or two of his good-natured giggles. "The secretaryship of a cigar-stand is a rather more hopeful occupation than carrying your wraps through the street." Everything was arranged. Mrs. Wistaria and her husband set off for San Jose. I am a merchant lady. The first thing I did was to put up a dignified sign with the following black letters: "Morning Glory Cigar Store." I borrowed a picture from Mrs. Willis's parlor and placed it by the slot machine. It is the picture of a dear Injun sitting against a woodland fire with a respectable pipe, whose smoke sails up to the yellow moon. What resignation! What dream! What joy! It did suit beautifully for the cigar stand. I love to see a man smoking. The elfish smoke acts like a merry-hearted May gossamer. When I observe a man's eye pursuing his smoke, I say to myself that his soul must be stepping nearer to his ideal. The road of smoke is the road of poesy. A noble trade is tobacco. Man's hermitage is situated only in smoking, I should say. I divested my uncle of his coat. I begged him to hold a bucket and a piece of cloth for a moment. "Are you ready to wash the windows, uncle?" I said. "Traitor, Morning Glory!" He flashed his accusing glare. Docile old man. He cleaned 4 windows of the kitchen, which was also the dining room and the parlor. I paid him 5 cents for each. I said, "It's good fun to hire the chief secretary of the Nippon Mining Company to rub windows, isn't it?" And I laughed. Then I forced him to buy a cigar. "You made some 20 cents out of me. Your turn is coming, my uncle," I said. I sold him a box of Lillian Russell cigars for $3. The real price was 2. Ha ha ha! 12th. I invited my precious Ada to my store to dine à la Japonaise. One Jap restaurant catered to it. "Irashaimashii! Condescend to enter." I showered my wooden-clogged greeting over Ada. From the Klondike, my neighboring saloon, a nigger song was flapping in. "If you ain't got no money, well, you needn't come around." Happy Ada-san! She was about to join in it when I brought her into my great dining room. Beg pardon, it was a paltry kitchen. Everything was seen on the table. Japanese dinner has no strict order of courses. You are a frolicsome butterfly among the dishes set like flowers before you. You may flit straight to any one which catches your whim. "Take your honorable chopsticks," I said. Poor Miss Ada! How shall I manage with one stick? She raised her eyelids in questioning meekness. I bade her to split the stick in 2. It was a brand new wooden one. I showed her how to finger it. She nibbled a bit from each dish. Every time she tasted, she looked upon me with a suspicious smile. And how she slipped her sticks at the critical moment! The sight amused me hugely. "How dare I swallow raw fishes?" she said, shrinking. "What delight I taste in them!" I slammed back at her timidity. Then I dipped a few cuts of the fishes into a porcelain soy pan for my mouth. I even trampled into her fish dish by and by. She was literally terrified. The feast was over. I said, "Go yukuri," honorable not to be in a hurry. I slid away. I tied my white apron like a shop girl. I was glad that I did not forget to push a lead pencil through my hair. I presented myself to Ada, carrying a cigarette box. "Will you buy tobacco for your lord?" I spread the box before her. "How much for one packet?" she asked, with the charming arrogance of a customer. She was acting also. "Today is the memorial day of Lord Nono-sama. My sweet Oko-san, allow me to make a reduction." Then we laughed. 13th. I created much noise in the Jap colony. Why not? Many brown men pause by my store and buy, simply because they can address a word or two to me. They are silly, aren't they? I announce that I am tired of their faces. I have never met one progressive-seeming Oriental since I landed. They are like a dry tree. Are their souls dying? "Well, that's why they have no girl," my uncle conclusioned. "He is so bright once in a while. Why not make love with 'Merican musume?" I said I would petition the Tokyo government to transplant her women. It may ruin the Japanese girl's name, was my afterthought, if they ship only the homely gang. Lovely girl has no longing to sail over the ocean. She has plenty of chance to grow a flower bride at home. I pity my native boys of this city. Jap, Jap. They are dashed with such exclamations from every corner. As for me, the sound of Jap is my taste, so I spray it in my writing. I took up again my knitting work, which I had commenced on the seas. Nothing could be more decent to fill up my leisure in the store. My little neck fell as I was intent on my stocking. Someone spoke above my head. "How is business?" "So-so," I replied in business-like reserve. I lifted my face. "Oh yeah, he was Mr. Consul." "Will you sell me a cigar?" "Things are becoming awfully high. Mine is a distinctly dear store. Do you know it, Mr. Consul?" "I'm prepared to buy more at the beautiful girl's," he began to titter. "General Arthur's cigar has leaped $1 higher since Monday, and—" "You don't mean it!" He mimicked a sudden alarm. 14th. Oh, funny drunkard! Today one fellow established himself before my store. He fixed his amazing eyes on my face and extended his hairy hand. "Hello, Japanese," he stuttered. He wanted to shake hands with me. I lengthened my arm and slapped his face. I withdrew directly within and watched him from a hole. "Ha ha! She got mad! Ha ha ha!" He was in a tip-top state of mind. "Let me help myself." He pilfered one cigar from the shelf. He struck a match. He bit the cigar. "Good," he muttered. He tossed himself away with ludicrous dignity, singing, "Pon pili yon pon pon." "This is undeniably a tough place," I exclaimed.
Part 9. 15th. Night has arrived. Only 10 minutes ago, a white-capped Jim, I overheard people calling him so, lighted a paper lantern labeled tamales. He is an eating stand keeper across the street. The loafers passed. There was some time to watch the lazy parade. It was a blank hour of Saturday when he could puff a whiff of smoke. The prankish songs ceased. Even in DuPont Street, I am given a page of dream. The barkeeper of Remember the Maine called at my store. Remember the Maine? It is a name cheap as the grimness of a toothless woman. Mr. Barkeeper had something to say, I imagined. I offered a stem of cigarette. "Do you ever hear a bloody cry at night?" he began his chapter, gathering a medley of gravity on his brow. "Scream? No. Never mind." He turned aside. I thought he was playing a threadbare artifice of a storyteller to tantalize my fancy. "Tell me why." I knew I became his victim. "I fear I do scare you." "No, I never." I leaned forward. "To begin with—" He stopped, looking around. Your kitchen, don't be scared, is close by a haunted room of a house on Pine Street. It's no story. A chorus girl lived, well, some 5 years ago in that house with her stepmother. Just think. The old hen of 65 fell in love with her daughter's lover. Do you understand? She saw one morning the young fellow kissing her daughter. She went crazy. She shot him. Isn't it awful? The murderess leaned against the wall by your kitchen and cried, "I killed him." I swear to you that it is all true. So, people say, a wail is heard at night from your side. "Ma, ma," I breathed. That is all. He retired heavily. Do I believe it? No, no, I denied. But I was thickly swarmed by sickening air. How could I trust to be in the kitchen? I closed the store. I pasted up a piece of paper whereon was written, "No business tonight." 16th. I had a stomach ache this morning. I couldn't rise. The maid fetched me some toast and a cup of coffee. I think it is very nice to eat in bed. 17th. Mrs. Wistaria and her husband returned from San Jose. She lavished on me her 1,000 arigatos. She said I sold 60% more than on any previous week. She wished me to condescend to accept a meager $15 as a share of the profits. I refused it. 18th. My letter to Miss Pineleaf, who wept with me reading Keats's love letters one mournful night, is as follows. Matsuba-san, Hitofud Mirase Soro. I have the honor to present a brief writing. Let me omit the shop-worn form of Japanese letter writing. Its redundant honorables are more cheap than honorable. Sate Toya. Shall I begin my letter with a deep bow? Bow? I use it occasionally before American-san for sport's sake, but it is degenerating, in my opinion, to comic opera, like the tortoise-shell-framed spectacles of a Chinese doctor. Now I address you with 1,000 kisses. The kiss is the thing to begin with for up-to-date girls. It is useful, as a poem is useful in filling up space in magazine making. Woman, even a loftily learned American woman, cannot be ready always with her rhetoric of expression. The kiss comes to her relief in the crisis whenever she fails in speech. The kiss is everything. The Jap girl is intimate with the art of crying. A kiss is as eloquent as a tear. I suppose the cleverness of American woman is graded by the way she handles it. It strikes me that every white girl is perfectly at home with it. She is awfully bright. You wonder why she is so? There is one reason that I can tell you. It is because she has a serious job to pick out her husband herself. I don't think it is fair to blame her growing insipid after marriage. Everyone feels tired when a weighty work is done. What would be her doom if she were stupid? An old maid is such a sad sight, like a broken clock, or a cradle after baby's death. Isn't it dreadful to have nothing to rejoice in but a customary tea or books? Literary critic is one occupation left for her, worse than death. I am pained to state that our Brown sisters are extremely behind time. There are lots of exceptions, of course, like Honorable U and Miss M.G. I am talking of common Jap Masumis. Naturally so. They are like those waiting at the station for the next train. They have only to doze and wait for the footsteps of a matchmaker with a young man. I am grateful to the Nippon government for stimulating education in women. But I advise her to imprison all the matchmakers. Then the girls will wake up at once, like one who has everything on her back after Papa's passing. That is one process to brighten them, I think. Am I not logical? Your last Tagami questioned me whether the American lady was charming. Are you attentive to Western sea painting? How does it impress you when you are close by? Only a jumble of paint, isn't it? So with American women. You should be off half a dozen steps to estimate her beautiful captivation. You would be horrified otherwise by her hairy skin. I love her. She has no headache like the Japs. By the way, I will call Japan hereafter the country of headache. She lives in a comedy. Nothing turns bad in America. Tragedy to be a woman could only be seen on fiction thrown in moth-trodden second-hand store. Police never bother. Such a deliverance. I am delighted with my American Kenbutsu. Sayonara, yours, Morning Glory. 19th. I forced Uncle to swear to me that he would overlook everything I did in consideration of my great service in darning his socks. I peeled off my shoes to begin with. I sat like a Turk. Why do you frown like an oni in hell? I acidified my smile. I held my needle and thread suspended in the air while I said, "What is a trust?" "Be quiet," he exclaimed. He didn't even glance at me, being engaged in writing in the other nook. "Uncle, your hair ought to be curled. I will step in tomorrow morning and turn it up before you awake. What do you think, Uncle? Oji-san." "Morning Glory-san." He emitted a growl of satanic despotism and soon resumed his work gracefully. I thought what a scandal if he were penning a love letter to Mrs. Schuyler, Jr. I rose. I approached him with secret step. I fell on him from his massy back and cried, "What are you scribbling?" "Eri, my honorable uncle." He was translating Gibbon's History of Rome. I was stunned from the shame of taking him to be in such a wretched line even in fancy. I vowed to myself, with 3 low bows, to take perfect care of my noble worker. Then I gave him my sweet smile. "Uncle, let me fix something more. Haven't you anything? Tear your shirt or pull off the buttons then." 20th. Already I could suck from the agile air the flavor of spring upon the lawn. I was roving by the rose bushes along the street with scissors. A gentleman passed by me. How sluggish his shoes sounded. He stopped, waving his old scented smile, and addressed me. "Good morning, young lady." "Ohio." "I perceive that you are Japanese." "Yes, sir." He stepped nearer to me. I took a peep at the Bible under his arm. "Are you a Christian?" He lowered his tone. "Don't you read the gospel?" His voice rose higher. "Don't you attend church?" His sound grew higher still. I loved to be shocked. I couldn't sustain myself against a bore. "Church? It's too sleepy, don't you know? I have remarked that God is with me without any sort of prayer, if I trace the path of righteousness. A minister is only a meddling grandmamma to my mind. If I ever build my ideal city, 2 things shall not be tolerated. One is a lawyer's office and the other is a church. Church, sir. May I present you with 1 rose?" I raised me to place it in his coat. "Here's a letter for you, Morning Glory." I was rescued by my uncle. How angelic his voice rang. "I'm sorry, I'm much occupied this very morning," I said, bowing slightly. I pushed myself within the door. Poor preacher. 21st. My answer to Oscar is as follows. Dear Honorable Mr. Ellis, let me begin in respectable fashion. A Jap girl is awfully formal. Do you know, Mr. Ellis, whom you are addressing? I'm an Oriental. Nippon daughters believe everything a gentleman mentions. They have been fooled enough, I should declare, in American fiction. No, Mr. Ellis, don't let me earn the anecdote that I drifted to America to be toyed with. My ancestor did a harakiri. I am pretty sure I have then to kill myself. Don't recite again your honorable confession of love. It made me cry. My dark face with drenched eyes will degrade me to a hired Chinese crying woman. Your narration was dramatic. Your cleverness is the most lamentable thing about you. Women used to love a bright fellow many years ago. Do you know that the modern girl woos a stupid man? Please don't repeat again such an adjective as heavenly for my face. No one utters the word heaven except in swearing. Even ministers jiggle with it for a jest in church, I suppose. My face isn't heavenly at all. You know it, don't you? You amused me, however, when you told how you had pillaged my picture from Mother Schuyler's room to put in your own, feigning that it needed to be retouched. Poor Mother Schuyler! If she knew your secret. Frankly, I fear that such a gentleman as you does commit forgery always. Have you no consanguinity with a convict? Oh, such a wretched boy! The saddest thing about a woman is that she is glad to fall in love with the worthless. Do I love you? Give me time to reply to the question. Everything is tardy with the Japanese. I was educated by slowness. I bow 12 times before I speak. Oh, Oscar, you got to think of my side a little bit. Every girl claims that she has half a population as adorers in her pocket handkerchief. You are the only one young American I ever met. If I accept your love, I am afraid one may satirize my destitution. You'll write me soon, won't you? Yours, M.G. P.S. I wish I could show you how charmingly I smoke. I learned the art recently. I tap the cigarette with my middle finger to knock the ashes off. It is delightful to heap a hill of ashes on the table edge. When I puff, finding no word after "and," the smoke seems to be speaking for me. But I assure you that I smoked only before my uncle. I was a pretty naughty girl at home, but I flatter myself that I can easily be classed among the best in this country. White women behave terribly, you know. 22nd. I passed the afternoon at Mrs. Consol's. She gave me her favorite discourse on Walt Whitman. I delivered to my uncle what I had learned. No newness in it. It is what dear John Burroughs or Mr. Stedman said. He overturned my castle with one blow, and lit his cigar with a victorious air. I was enraged. Yes, yes, Eriwa. Oriental gentleman knows everything we poor women know, I said. I sulkily drew away to my room with Mr. Whitman's fat book that I borrowed from Mrs. Console. 23rd. A letter from my father arrived. Oh, Papa, please don't. I am tired of such a dirty conference, I scoffed. I tore the paper into shreds. What a sullen lady! What did Otto-san write? Marriage proposal, I reckon. My uncle intruded. Papa threatened me with a list of suitors. He cried, "Chance, chance," like the gate man of an Anichi show. Pray grant me, for once in my life, uncle, to say, the marriage lottery go to the dogs. How many Jap girls kill themselves from the burden of such a glued union, do you suppose? Then free marriage? Of course. It is very beautiful, Miss Morning Glory. Why not? You are Japanese, aren't you? Did you ever think I was American, Jin? Well then, how did you come to know young men in a country where familiarity with one is regarded as a crime for a girl? Things all wrong in Nippon, uncle. I am sorry you were born a Jap. I'll never go back to Japan, I think. The dictionary for Jap girls comprises no such word as no. But you must remember, uncle, I have the capital No in my head. I am a revolutionist, I proclaimed. Then I thought much of my dear Oscar. 24th. My worthy laborer upon Gibbon's work sat before the table for some hours. I stood behind him and dropped the fluid from a bottle on his head. Cold! What are you doing, my little romp? He looked up in fright. No harm, uncle, it is only a remedy. Your hair is growing so thin. Do you know it? I think it a shame to appear in Greater New York with a bald gentleman. I bought the bottle this morning. In America, Part 10. 25th. A bamboo table in my room reminded me of a take bush in the neighboring churchyard of my Tokyo home. I cannot sound American Jin's curiosity in prizing such a cheap thing. The bamboo was painted. The crossed nails glared from everywhere. I never saw such a Jap work in Nippon. Dear take, O bamboo bush. How I used to laugh, breaking the dreams of sparrows by wriggling the bush. I was so ungoverned. If I could be a grammar school girl again! I secured a reader at a bookstall. My mind was made up to present myself in the Lincoln Night School and mingle with the girls in See the Boy and the Dog. What fun! I went to see the stooping principal. His tarnished frock coat, I fancied he was an old bachelor as one button was off, was just the thing for such a role. I seemed to him a regular nen of 13. He was heartily pleased with my greediness for learning English. Poor soul. He ushered me into the class for which I had brought the book. It was the hour for composition. Ocean, the subject. When I was seated, the girl next to me winked charmingly. She threw me a note within a minute, to which I promptly replied Morning Glory. My note was answered Miss Madge, 340 Mission Street. I wrote her, May I call on you tomorrow? For which she wrote, As you please. I was placed on the dangerous verge of clapping Byron's poem into my ocean. I manufactured 12 of spelling errors. You should belong to some higher class. Take this slip to the principal, the teacher said. You have an imagination. She wiped her spectacles slowly. I left the room remarking, because I am a Japanese. I slipped away from the school altogether. One experience is plenty, I declared. 26th. I went to Mission Street to call on Madge. From both sides of the street peeped the famous Jewish noses. The second-hand clothing shops parade. How droll to see those noses shriveling like a lobster. Madge's father owns a despicable restaurant with only 4 eating tables. Mama cooks while she sits on the counter. When I appeared, she shot out, greeting me, "Hello, Morning Glory." "Awfully glad to see you. I have come to help you, haven't I?" I was ready to strip off my jacket and wind myself in her apron. Her papa was dumbfounded by my sudden action. The outside board with the bill of fare was scraped out by this morning's rain. It looked as miserable as an Italian vegetable wagon under the rain. My first work was to rewrite it. I saw a Jew in a neighboring door striving with one about the value of pants. A shoemaker's pan hammered on my head from the opposite house. Mission Street is the street of horse dung. When my job was over, an honorable Mr. Wagon Driver leaped in, bidding me serve some soup. I ran into the kitchen to fetch it. I spilled it on the table. "That's all right, honey," he said in a patronizing aloofness, and pierced my face with his gummy red eyes. Oh, Kawaya! Shocking. I put one $5 piece of gold on Madge's palm when I left her, because her shoes were heelless. Pity the Misumi. 27th. I bought one book, being captivated by its title. Isn't When Knighthood Was in Flower beautifully chivalrous? I have remarked that every imperial cruiser anchors at an isle close by Lu Chu, just on account of the enticement in the name Come and See. I found in my trunk an introduction to Miss Rose by my professor friend of Tokyo Versity. Miss Rose? My imagination started to move like a watch. I fancied she should be 19 since she was a miss. No Rose girl can be homely. I went to see her. Alas! She was a lady like a beer barrel. Her fingernails were black. I left her like a miner stepping out of a gold mountain with empty hands. I wonder why the mayor didn't object to letting an ugly woman be crowned with a pretty name. 50 years old Miss Rose. Now I fear to read Mr. Major's book. 28th. The following is my letter to Mr. Oscar. Oscar-san, Ellis-san. I never liked your profession simply because it is too beautiful. I don't see why you cannot transfer to some other business. I have been ever so much fascinated with odd sorts of manual work. If I were a gentleman, I would very likely pursue the calling of grave digger or sea diver. Yesterday I passed by some laborers breaking massive stones. They lifted their hammers. Oh, Oscar, look at their muscles. And knocked them down to the sound of Sarah Baggin. They jerked the Sarah Baggin, Oscar. Does it mean ready? Mr. Willis's Century Dictionary must be imperfect, since it does not contain such a word. Am I misspelling? Suppose I marry one of those. He will return home awfully tired. He will naturally doze after dinner. When his smoking pipe has slipped from his lips and burned my best tablecloth, isn't it possible that I will be mad? I startled him, pulling his hair ever so hard. Now you must think that he grew mad also. He seized my arm and beat me. Oh, Oscar, he beats me surely. Then he will repent his conduct and kneel by my side, begging my forgiveness. He will say, "My dear, sweet wife." Do you know how interesting it is to be beaten by a husband? I well nigh fixed my mind never to affiance with a man too genteel to hit me. Woman is a revolting little bit of thing. If you say yes, I am quite ready to slam my no. Oscar-san, I am afraid that you are too amiable. What you have to do for your next missive is to collect every kind of dreadful adjectives from your dictionary and throw them in. You know what to do when I get angry, don't you? Ellis-san, you are too handsome. I am fond of a comely face as anybody else, but I fancy often how it would be if I fell in love with a deformity. People would laugh at me, doubtless, but how dramatic it would be when I proclaimed, "Because I love him." What a romantic phrase that is. Can't you deform yourself? Sayonara. With 1,000 bows, M.G. P.S. My letter never finishes without a P.S. Isn't that awful? My uncle asked me whom I was corresponding with. I mentioned Olive. Old man is jealous always. So you got to counterfeit your sister's penmanship for your envelope. 29th. I drank the last drop of my coffee. Oji-san, when shall we go to New York? I said, pillowing my face on my hands on the breakfast table. As soon as spring begins to flicker in the east, my little woman. It's snow and snow there at present. I love snow, uncle. Old gentlemen can't bear tyrannical cold, Morning Glory. Don't you notice how tired I am of Frisco? Aren't you tired? Yes, frankly. Why don't you then contrive some novel diversion to pass a month? I've a fancy, but what is it? It may not strike you as romantic. Tell me. I am known to one poet who dreams and erects a stone wall on the hillside. He is unlike any other. His garden and cottage are open to everybody. I ever incline to loaf in an irregular puff of odor from his acacia trees. If you lean towards a poetical life, I have no hesitation in seeing him to make an arrangement. Great, uncle, it's romantic. Is he married? Why? Because a poet is not one woman's property, but universal. My ideal poet is melancholy. Fat poet is ridiculous. Happy poet isn't of the highest order. Tennyson? I wish his life had been more hard up. I suppose your friend poet won't mind if I sleep all day? Is he particular about the dinner time? Does he look up to the stars every night? Does he wash his shirt once in a while? Stop. Then I asked respectably, is the sight from there beautiful? Wonderful. The only place where you can breathe the air of divinity. Very well, uncle. We will settle there and hasten to become poets. It wouldn't be a bad idea, I say, to start again with your honorable lotos eaters. Paradise Lost shall be my next subject. If nobody publishes it, I will present it solemnly to our Empress. She is a poetess, you know. My uncle went to see Mr. Poet. 30th. Uncle said that the poet said, "You are welcome, sir. The cottage for your young lady lies by one willow tree. The waters, the air, the grand view are God's. It costs a wee bit of money to provide the best coffee. I tell you that my claret is superb. You shall be my guest as long as you please. Present my love to Miss Morning Glory. Everything will be ready when you come." Isn't he adorable? I ejaculated. I stirred my trunk and sifted out the things needful for my adventure. 31st. Tomorrow. The Heights, February 1st. Let me recline heart to heart on the breast of Mother Nature. Let me retreat to a hillside not far from the city, yet verily near to God. Let me go to my poet abode. We abandoned the Fruitvale car at the hill foot. My uncle picked out our destination from the speckles in the distance. The breeze, how heavenly is a country breeze, enticed my soul. A Jap girl also is provided with some soul. Into far beyond. I feel myself another girl, uncle. How? I am a poet already. The poet without poem is greater, don't you know? We climbed the hill slowly. Every step enlarged the spectacle. When we attained to one wildly well-kept garden, the whole bay of the Golden Gate stretched before us. 1,000 villages knelt humbly like vassals. I saw a tiny gate with the sign, Fruit Grower. An old gentleman appeared from a cottage, singing, "Ah, take the cash and let the credit go, nor heed the rumble of a distant drum." Poet, uncle whispered. Let me now examine him. What lengthy hair he wore! It didn't annoy me, however, because he stamped himself on my mind as if he were an ancient statue. I imagined him a type of medieval squire. I thought of him truly as one metamorphosed from the frontispiece of a wholly forgotten volume in a cobwebbed recess of a library. His courteous voice was simply dignified. Nature never hurries. God commands you every happiness and all repose. Here's your little home, my gentle lady. I am at your service any time. I hope you will find it comfortable. He set me at the willow cottage. He slipped gracefully away. There was some time before I heard his katsu katsu on my door. I opened it. Greetings from the host. Mr. Heine offered me a tuft of brisk roses. Heine was the poet's name. How loving! I buried myself in the thought of straying to a fairy isle and being accepted romantically by the dwellers. I suspected that I was dreaming. Arcadia! I exclaimed, when the poet announced that supper would be prepared within half an hour. I spied him through the window, gathering the loppings of trees and leaves. He made a campfire. Its soft smoke surged into the sky. Oh, smell it! How fascinating is the poet's life! I ran out crying, "Pray, make me useful."
Second, dream and reality are not marked here by different badges. They waltz round. Dear poet, home. Was it in my dream that I heard the tinkle of bells? I thought something was going on. I parted from the bed. I pushed out my face from the window. Look at the procession of cows. I've read much of them, but I admit that it was my first occasion to admire them. I am a trivial Jap, only acquainted with cherry blossoms and lanterns. How I wish to knot the bells round my waist and whisk down the path by the violets. Lover's Lane. It should be the title for that path, I thought, if I were Mr. Poet. I finished my toilet. I leaped out upon the grasses, smiling up to the sunlight. I congratulated myself on my new life. Then I found my uncle sitting by the campfire. "Oh, hi-yo," I said, filling the seat on another side. I remember one Japanese essay, "The Poetry of a Tea Kettle." Indeed, the kettle was a singer. Its melody was far-reaching. It was like a harp of pine leaves fingered by the zephyr. I faced up and saw my poet moving down from the lily pond, two frogs in his hand. "Frogs," I cried. "They will complete our table. How did you sleep, my lady? Splendid. Do you love the country? I begin to taste a greater joy in nature." "I'm happy to hear it, my dear. My life is like the life of a bird. I wake when the sun rises. I lay me in the bed at the bird's dipping into its nest. God made the night for keeping quiet. That is better than prayer itself. I light neither lamp nor candle. I presume that every young lady has certain secret work at night. Let me offer you a few candles." We ate breakfast from the table by the fire. Frogs supplied a special dish. I couldn't touch it, thinking of the songs of frogs that I had heard all the night long. Such a song! It was the muddy-booted song of the countryside. No valuable quality in it, of course, but I should say that they tried the best they could. Poor Monsieur's frog! I fancied the leg in my dish was that of one who volunteered to sing my lullaby. I almost cried in grief. The poet was ready to wash the dishes. I was quick to snatch his job. My uncle wiped them. Stupid uncle! He broke two dishes. I collected the bones of the frogs and buried them. On the stone above them I wrote with a pencil, "Tomb of unknown singers." What time was it when we were done with our breakfast? I couldn't tell. The first thing I did yesterday was to stop the tick-tack of my watch and hide it in the lowest drawer. The watch is a nuisance since I'm thrown in the garden of eternity. Third, I searched for a pen and ink in my willow cottage. Nothing like those. Foxy poet. He hid them from view, I fancied, in the opinion that playing with them for a girl is more jeopardous than swallowing needles. I say that letter writing, particularly a decent love letter, if there is one, isn't half so grave a crime as rhyming. I was spraying some water on a rose by the gate when I caught sight of a white quill by my shoes. "This will serve me perfectly," I said. I had not one thing with any tooth except my comb. Comb? Luckily I've not lost it. Ara ma, my hairpins. 5 of them vanished from my head while I was springing amid the rocks. By and by the stems of acacia leaves shall be used in their places. Don't you know this is quite a remote spot from civilization? A kitchen knife shaped my quill as a pen. Now only ink. I begged Uncle to run down 3 miles to fetch 1 bottle. Fourth, we went to breathe the song of the forest. The forest laces the poet's canyon. By the way, poet's ground spreads over 150 acres. Does he pay taxes? We climbed the road to the Milky Way. I beseech your forgiveness. It was merely the name I wished for the path to the poet's hilltop. I felt as if I were hurrying to the Sermon on the Mount. You would hardly believe Morning Glory if she said that sublimity vibrated in her soul because she was just a little Oriental. How grand! We faced toward the gate of the Pacific Ocean. We were still. Why? Because we were thinking the same thing. We traversed the poet's graveyard. How romantic to put up a tombstone while living. How romantic to lie in the ecstasy of a marvelous view. We could be nearer the stars here. We stepped down to the canyon. The poet said solemnly, "Lady and gentlemen, this is a holy place where you can pray heartily." My uncle started to drone Bryant's hymn, "The groves were God's first temples." "Did you ever read Thanatopsis, my dear?" Mr. Heine asked. "Yes, sir. It's a noble piece. So many thousand Asiatics converted every year to the English alphabet. Wonderful," he soliloquized. We seated ourselves by a brook. "Such a lesson in nature we endeavor to transcribe but fail," he sighed, looking on the trees. Then he turned to me questioning, "Do you hear the silent song of the forest?" I nodded. "Silence, silence," he muttered. We walked among the trees. We came back to the same hilltop when the large red ball of the sun sank heavily from the gate. "Bye, bye." I shook my handkerchief. The playful breeze carried it away. It glimmered like a silvery inspiration. Who knows how far it sailed? I thought a huge statue of the Muse bidding sayonara to the dying sun would be the fitting ornamentation for these heights. Countless numbers of people would look upon it from the valley. It would be a salvation if they could bind themselves with poesy by its noble figure. There was no question it would be more effective than 1,000 pages of poem. "I have no coin to build it," the poet said in dear openness. "Let me present it by and by." "When? When? It must be after I get married to a rich philanthropist." We laughed. We rolled down the hill in the purple fragrance of evening. The evening was sweet like a legend. 5th. I wrote a letter to the artist. "My sweet Oscar, you will love no more your Morning Glory, I'm certain, when you are informed how she looks nowadays. She inclines against a willow trunk by her cottage. Were you ever acquainted with the great repose of a poetess? Her eyes flashed in divine sarcasm. She will shoot them down to the mortal domain. She lives on the mountain, while she murmurs in tragical accents, 'I pity you, ant mortals.' Isn't she shocking? Oscar, I've withdrawn to the heights, and am prying into the incomprehensible of nature with Mr. Heine. He is unique. I take it upon me to say that he is a great poet, because in the first place he never asked me yet, do poems pay in Japan? It's such a trying work for an old man like him to pose as a poet all the time. Poet is a sensitive creation. He fancies, I think, the whole world is staring at him. Poor poet, he keeps up and tries to be picturesque as he can. I'm grieved to state, however, that his picturesqueness frequently drops into silliness. The absurd thing is that even my uncle takes a part in his farce. We had no meat to bite yesterday. The poet had no shot left for his gun. What did he plan, do you imagine? He went up the hill, shouldering his pick. My uncle retainered him with a spade. "We will soon bring back a squirrel which we will dig out, Miss Morning Glory," the poet said. Could you ever suppose, Oscar, that any animal except an invalid, an animal who has 4 feet at that, instead of 2 like my venerable gentleman, could permit itself to be so slow like them? I laughed till my side ached. Funny old men. Every sort of sweat fell from their brows when they dragged their fatigued feet home, not accompanied by even 1 inch of any animal tail. "I've never heard yet, Mr. Poet, of a squirrel turned a turnip," I jibed. "I dread old age because it makes woman inquisitive and man silly. Inquisitiveness is tasteless like wax, while silliness is helpless like a fish on the sand. I fear you are silly already when you say that you sat up late looking at my picture. Sat up late? What will you do if your mamma thinks you can't sleep from hard drink when you yawn continually at the table? Please don't do it again. Step to your bed at 6:30 as I do. Are you sure that my picture approved your act? I guess it shrugged its shoulders from contempt. the delicious moment of blushing being past. If my picture is so precious, I advise you to alter it to ashes. You will take 2 spoonfuls of the ashes every morning. I'm sure then your soul will be saved. Oh, my darling, I love you. I'm your little Jap girl. P.S. This letter was written by my duck quill, my new invention, you know. My handwriting is clumsy enough, I suppose, to sell as high as any ancient author's autograph. Sayonara. 6th. Oh, Poppy, beloved harbinger of California spring. I hung on the honorable eyes of a poppy by my door, its quaking cup burnt in love, for a meadowlark, perhaps. Let me feed you, my new friend, I said, and brought out a cupful of water. I moistened it. A golden flake of the sun ray came down to it. It smiled, daintily thanking me for my humble treat. I stared at it, slowly fabricating a fable of its love affair, when the breeze sent me a dreamy song. The song was old-fashioned, like the afternoon snore of a water-wheel. I plunged into the song, not knowing who was the singer. Ara, grandmamma's song, I exclaimed. She is the aged mother of our poet. She is within the rim of 90. I suspected her of having discovered the elixir for preserving eternal girlhood. You cannot help esteeming her a philosopher when you are told that she has visited San Francisco only twice in 10 years. I have no bit of doubt that she would die if you were to rob her of the sight of her flower garden and one stout scrapbook about her son's poems. They work a miracle. What a mystery is human life. I say that I'm touched by superstition. I've read of a villainous fox who masquerades in the shape of an old woman. My wretched fantasy about Mrs. Heine passed when I heard that no fox resided in the hill. She is such a dear grandma. She has no hostile grimace against age. She welcomes it. Her wrinkles are all her beauty. Natural ripening in age is but another form of girlhood. She is as happy as a sparrow. Sparrow never forgets, it is said in Nippon, to dance in its 100th year. She hoes round her garden. Her vanity is to make her table rich with her own potatoes and roses. She lives alone by herself in a cottage some 100 steps from mine. Did you ever taste her cooking? Good morning, Mrs. Heine, I said. Come in. She showed herself, extending her large hands. They were damp. I thought she was employing herself in washing. Is there any sweeter occupation than service to an old lady? Let me help you. I carried out a bucket to a spring in the backyard. I brimmed it with the waters. It was so weighty. A naughty stone bounced under my heel. I was thrown down like a toy. Alas, my bucket was upset over my skirt. I'd made myself a specimen of misery. Oh, Grandma, it's raining awfully outside, I cried. 7th, today I was the chef, while my uncle was second cook. I placed a heroic iron pot over the campfire. I dropped a lump of beef in, and afterward the mass of potatoes, carrots, and onions. Mr. Poet's directions were that they should boil for 2 hours. Mr. Heine intruded, saying that he would like to season them himself. Longfellow, Lowell, they all loved high seasoning as I, he said, snatching a pepper box from my hand. He kept tapping the bottom of the box when the cover fell into the pot. Oh, yeah, the red pepper garmented the whole thing. Go, Mr. Poet, why don't you mind your own business? You are a butler today. I spoke in rough sweetness and drove him away. He began to place a linen cloth on the table. While I dipped up all the pepper, he picked up 12 pebbles to weight the tablecloth. The first thing he put on the table was his claret bottle. How could he lose it from sight? When he said that everything was in place, he had forgotten the knives and forks. Dear old poet. We sat at the table under the wild rose bushes. Mr. Heine read aloud the following menu. Perfume of Omar's rose, water of Jordan River, mother love broth, meat of wisdom, potatoes of simplicity, passion carrot, onion of wit, dream coffee, dessert. Typical Tokyo smile of Miss Morning Glory. My grandmamma was our guest. Mother, you talk too much always. Remember, this is a sacred service. Silence helps your digestion. Eat slowly, think something higher, and be content, Poet said. We smelled the perfume of Omar's rose and wet our lips with the water of Jordan River. The broth was served. Everybody choked with its pungent fire. Poor Mrs. Heine, she was showering her tear beans. This is perfectly seasoned. Send up your bowl again, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Poet's performance was beautifully buffoonish. We finished our meat and vegetables. I smiled lightly and said, Are you ready for the Tokyo smile? Just 10 minutes yet, my dear. The poet smoothed such a lengthy gray beard. I winked to Grandma. We looked upon him slyly.